So welcome to the second round. I have learned that after the mouth rains, there will be immediately energy now. And I appreciated that the carpet still looks good. So in the second part, Steph, can you? In the second part, the topic will be around dropout. Now some of you may ask me, what is the link between dropout and neuronal plasticity and brain training? Why we link these two topics? Let me give you a hint. One of the multiple reasons for dropout in junior level is stagnation of performance. If you no more improve your performance, you get bored. Why for I'm training if I not get better? But what is the reason of stagnation of performance? The crime is done before, in youth level. For example, it could be early specialization, one of the factors. And here we are back at the topic. Neuronal plasticity. Being able to throw right and left, jump right and left, turn left and right. How many of your athletes have done this? She disappeared. But I love the question over here, what did the sprinter do before? So after some circles, we formed that he did surfing and football. And we should not be jealous to football. Football, skill-wise, is quite demanding. Yeah? Ball control, passing. A good footballer is bilateral, right and left foot. So we can and we should use in our development not only running, jumping, throwing, but other sports. And this is definitely linked with the topic brain. It is our pleasure now to open the second part. We have the privilege to have Ville Kallinen with us. He is that close to his doctor. I don't know in hours, how many hours, and he has done some research, especially about the area we are talking about dropout. His background is swimming. Nobody is perfect. By the way, I also did 5 years swimming coach. We can learn a lot from swimming training, by the way, in track and field. And he is working with the Finnish track and field as an expert for children's sports. So he will give us some science background about the multiple potential factors which cause dropout. Because the numbers which are in literature, 60% dropout is too high. In the second part then, we will have his synergetic partner best practice, and I will introduce later to you the head coach of the Thailand team, Arjan Ekawit Savangpol. Ville, the floor is all yours.
Okay, hello to everyone. I hope you had a nice day here in Finland. I just talked to a couple of coaches before giving the talk that we've had a tremendous luck with the weather. So I hope you are too enjoying it as much as we are here in Finland, because this, I think, is quite rare for us. But thank you to Gunther and IAAF for inviting me to give this talk to you about dropout. Like Gunther mentioned, my background is with swimming. I used to do sprinting events for 15 years, so my heart and soul are with those events, also in track and field. I have nothing against endurance events, but my genetics is the reason why I did those. And I hope that because of my background with swimming, you are gentle with me, because I'm not an expert in, especially in athletics, the way you are here. Although I have to mention that I did track and field when I was younger. I used to do also sprinting events and some jumping events. I avoided throwing events because I was so super skinny that I couldn't do any proper results, so they weren't for me. that sometimes I have to admit that I have regretted skipping or dropping out of track and field, because if you think about swimming as a sport, it's honestly quite boring sometimes. You're looking at the tiles and the bottom of the swimming pool often, so at times when I look at the training that track athletes do, I think it's quite more intriguing sometimes doing it outdoors. And I think it's quite ironic now that I'm giving the talk about dropout, since I'm actually an actual dropout of track and field. But luckily, my story has quite a happy ending. I entered track and field competition for the first time in 10 years last summer, and I did shot put. And I did 10:35 and placed third. And I think it's an okay result for a first-timer to do a shot put. But the reason I quit actually track and field was that when I was younger, I felt that the track and field training was, back then it was a little bit boring compared to the swimming, because I was an ADHD child with lots of extra energy. So in the swimming practice, we did lots of like variety kind of training, and we were swimming all the time. But the track practices were mostly like doing one jump and then waiting the other children do the jump, and then jumping every 3 to 4 minutes. And as an energetic child, I couldn't wait that long. So I dropped out and decided to do swimming because of that. But I think that's enough about my history. Let's go to the actual topic of today, which is the dropout. At first, I'm gonna talk about what is the dropout, how can it be defined, and what kind of problem are we actually talking about in the world. Then I'm gonna address 3 different perspectives with the dropout. I have chosen 3 perspectives that are, I think, very important for coaches to acknowledge. First of them is early sports specialization, which is being a hot topic lately in the scientific field, and especially I think in some of the team sports. The World Cups are going on. Football is a good example about the early specialization and late specialization talk. So I'm gonna address a couple of questions concerning that. And then I'm gonna talk about relative age effect, which is important to acknowledge in track and field. I'm gonna talk a little more about that in detail. And lastly, I'm gonna talk about the motivational factors. I try to make a nice compact thing about those factors behind continuous sports participation. And finally, I'm gonna talk about, I'm gonna give you some conclusions and maybe some practical recommendations that you should consider in your daily practice. So I think we should start going on. Okay, so first, the definition of dropout in this competitive sports context, it basically means a withdrawal from the competitive sports. There are many definitions about it, and here is one classical example of it. Clint and Weiss studied in the 1980s. They studied gymnasts and the reasons of their dropout, and they categorized 3 different subgroups. First one was the reluctant dropouts, who were forced to quit competitive sports because of some serious accident or a reason for that they didn't want to. For example, car accident, or in track and field athletes, it could have been a serious shoulder injury that they couldn't do javelin anymore. Actually, we are in Finland, I think we're having one right now, probable dropout going on since Tero Pitkämäki, our javelin thrower, is having some serious problems with his knee. Let's see if he's going to retire or drop out from track and field in the age of 35 soon. The next one was the voluntary dropouts, that they had the desire to engage in other activities. I'm a voluntary dropout myself because I chose swimming over track and field. And the last one was the resistant dropouts, which can be characterized as athletes who perceive the costs of participation, which could be greater than the benefits. And a good example about these athletes could be like students who have finished high school that are going to the university, that they think about that should they go to the medical school, have a nice degree and have a nice salary and have a nice life, or put all of their effort into maybe some individual sports that doesn't give them enough money to live. So they decide to go to the medical school because it's more beneficial to their life. And those people can be considered resistant dropouts. I want to remind you that there are multiple ways to categorize these dropouts, and this is only one way to do it. And you shouldn't think about dropouts as a simple process. And normally it's a longitudinal process that doesn't come out of the blue when athlete decides to stop. And here I have outlined that it's a complex and multifactorial process, and coaches should be aware of these different things. Next, I'm going to talk about these dropout rates. And I have talked to many coaches here during the competition, and I feel that the practical stuff I have talked with you coaches is that we are sharing a common problem globally, and the scientific evidence backs up this notion. I have taken an example out of Finnish athletes from a study by Konttinen et al. Actually, he's my supervisor in my PhD. They studied Finnish track and field athletes who were born in 1987 during a follow-up period, 2002 and 2005. And during that time, 76% of all the athletes born in 1987 in Finland dropped out, and the amount of those athletes was 1,800. So it's maybe, I'm not good in math, maybe it's around 1,400 athletes, so that's a quite huge number. And depending on the reference or the study, this number may change a little bit, but the fact is that it's a huge problem in competitive sports, and that should be acknowledged. And here I have put this figure out of from Finnish track and field athletes from 2016. These are the athletes doing track and field competitively who have the competition license. As you can see, at the 10-year-olds, over 2,500 kids have the license and are still competing, but at the age of 18, the number is around 500. So we are talking about huge amount of dropouts. And I think this curve, what I've seen, is pretty common in many countries. And like previously this morning, I read an article from Jean Coté that the United States are actually battling with the problem of football dropouts at the moment. That last year, I think the article said that 10 to 19-year-olds players, almost 30% of those players drop out annually from the football. So huge numbers. And what I want to point out that I don't think the purpose is to make this line go like this, that everyone should be participating all of their lives in track and field, because this is natural progress. Everyone will drop out because of a reason X at some point. Somebody might think that they want to focus on the studies, and somebody has an injury, but many of these dropouts can be predicted and prevented by doing a good coaching job. And I think the curve should go something like this in the future. So that is what I want to point out here. Okay, so let's go to the first topics. Here are some familiar athletes. You may know some of these athletes. Here is Kobe Bryant, he's retired, Tiger Woods and Michelle Kwan. The reason why they are here are that they are these athletes who have early specialized in their sport. They have invested a lot of amount of time during their childhood to the sports and made a very good results in that sport. And I wanted to bring these athletes because many times in people's minds when these top athletes and their stories come out, everyone starts to think that they should copy the pathway or the reality that they did. But does the actual scientific evidence suggest that this is the best way to reach elite athlete level? I want to talk about that next. So, early specialization can be defined as focused involvement in one sport and a large numbers of hours of deliberate practice with the goal of improving sports skills and performance outcomes during childhood. First, I don't want to put like this setting that early sports specialization is bad compared to the late specialization, or late specialization is bad compared to the early sports specialization. I want to address the benefits and maybe some negative sides connected to each of these things. And some benefits in the studies have been associated with early sports specialization. For example, in some sports like figure skating or gymnastics, it may be needed that the children start doing a lot of amount of training at very young age to reach elite status. And also, of course, when kids do a huge amount of training in one sport, their physical activity goes up, and it has been associated, as you know, that the physical activity, and like Roman talked here, is associated with certain health benefits and so on. But I have to tell you that the early sports specialization the longitudinal effects of that is not so well known in the scientific field, so it still needs some studies more about the potential benefits of the early sports specialization. And here are the probable cons of the early sports specialization. First of all, early sports specialization is associated with injuries, and the reason is that many times they are defined as overuse injuries with the early sports specialized, that it's often the result of repetitive trauma to the bones, tendons, and ligaments that the young athlete's body can't handle. For example, a good example about this can be javelin throw, that you do the single repetitive thing all over again, and it brings problems to your shoulder joint, and that can lead to a dropout because of an injury. and that's often associated with the ESS. And the next one is burnout. Some of the coaches may know what burnout is because of the 24/7 job. At least in the Finnish coaches, I have heard that some of them may have it. The burnout symptoms include such things as depression, agitation, loss of appetite, different other physiological problems. And because of these problems, it can lead to dropout in a prolonged state of dropout. And I want to also remind that burnout usually doesn't develop suddenly, so it's also a longitudinal process. So as a coach, you have to be aware of the warning signs when athletes start to burn out. And many times, this early sport specialization, that doing only one sport, it may lead to burnout because you don't have any other things to do, that your mind is only focused on one thing in your life, and that's not good for the young athletes. The third thing is social isolation, which means that when younger children focus only on one sport, I mean, for example, track and field could be a potential example of this. I've understood that your training groups can be quite small at some times, and the social group that you're having is actually quite small. So you have maybe 4 to 5 people in your coaching team, and the athletes that are training together, they're maybe the same amount. So that's quite a small social group, and this social isolation can lead to burnout and also to dropout again. So these are the factors that are associated with early sports specialization. And if you consider ESS and dropout in track and field, it has to be said that the scientific evidence suggests that the ESS does not predict athletic success. For example, Australian study found out when they studied track and field Olympic and World Championship level athletes that their development was through late specialization to the Olympic level. And that's one good example about that. But as an event, track and field as a sport, I think it provides a variety of skills to learn naturally. You can throw objects, you learn to jump, and you can do running, and of course then there is this very hard skill called pole vaulting. So as a sport, it's a good sport in itself for your motor development. And I think as a coaches, you should encourage the athletes to do different disciplines at the youth phase, like the javelin, pole vault, hurdles, and not specialize, for example, only on sprinting events at very young age. And I think it may also prove beneficial to do and encourage them at young age to do other ball games, maybe football, basketball, volleyball, and so on. Next, I want to address the relative age effect, which is, I think it's prevalent in track and field. And it's a biased distribution of athletes' birth date with an overrepresentation of those born at the beginning of the competitive year. And this means that when selecting athletes for the national team or the athletes medaling at youth stages, there's some proof that many of the overrepresentation of these athletes who are medaling and entering the international competitions are born at the beginning of the year. There is this famous Canadian ice hockey study which showed that the youth athletes who were chosen to the Canadian national team, I think it was the 76% of the athletes were born in the January, February, March phase of the year. And in the adult stages, this goes off. And here I'm trying to illustrate this effect with these boys. These boys are the same age. And if you think about track and field, that I think these are 15-year-olds. So if this is competing with this in the running events or throwing events, I think he has some physical benefits going on, even though they are born in the same year and competing at the same age group. Here are some common notions about the relative age effect, that it's particularly visible at the ages of 10 to 19, and in the later adult stages, the effect goes off. And it's more prevalent for males than females, and the probable explanation for this is the biology, because of testosterone and growth hormone that is that males produce much more. And of course, track and field is associated with RAE because of your competitive systems, which uses a 2-year range to categorize youth athletes. So at worst case scenario, somebody might be almost 2 years younger than the athletes they are competing with. So I think it's a very important thing to acknowledge this. And when the younger athletes who are born in the end of the year, they might feel or get feelings of incompetence annually and poor experiences because they can't do any good results compared to the age group. So eventually, if you get your, sorry to say this, if you get your ass kicked 6 years straight, I think nobody likes that, so you want to drop out from the sports. I'm an actual example also of this relative age effect again. I'm born in the October, and I looked like a little boy until I was 16. I don't know if there's a difference now compared to that, but I was in the 15 age group. I was second to last in my age group. I was this little boy, and at 16, I think I finished 4th in 100 freestyle in my age group. And if I'm brutally honest, I didn't do any extra special training to achieve that. I think it was because of something magical happened biologically to me. Okay, so I want to bring up a couple of studies about this in athletics. Hollings investigated the effects in athletic event finalists at the 2008 Junior World Championships and the 2009 Youth Championships, and they found this RAE effect was true. The effect was strong for both boys and girls and for both competitions, but for boys it was larger than for girls. And I think, again, the explanation can be biological reasons. And in the younger age group, under 18 competitions, it was stronger, the effect. Of course, because the junior level under 20-year-olds, they are much more near the adult stages. And the biggest RAE effects was found in youth boys, sprints, hurdles, throws, and jumps. And also a very recent study by Brazos Ayavera. I'm sorry if I can't pronounce that name correctly. Sorry for the Spanish-talking audience. And they investigated the role of RAE on selection for international competition of Spanish age group athletes between 2006 and 2014, and they found the same results. Again, that the RAE effect was stronger for boys and stronger for the youth. And I think coach's role here is very important when considering this RAE effect. They they have to understand that this early success is, like I said before, that it's not a predictor of athletic success later, and they should try to encourage and help some of the athletes to understand why they are not probably doing so well, especially in the ages of 17 and 18. And maybe coaches can try to identify the potential talent that even though they are not doing any good results until the age of 20, they could do it much later. So coaches have a very important role in this question. Okay, so, and lastly, I want to talk about the motivational factors behind continued sports participation. This was also a hard topic for me, even though I'm studying this thing, because I think motivation is a very complex thing. And many times when I have worked with coaches or people who are involved with children, they just say things like that he or she should be more motivated, or he or she didn't have the motivation, and motivation doesn't work like that. It is not a switch that you can like push on and off like that. You have to understand the process behind this, and that's why many of the sports scientists in the last 3 decades especially have developed different frameworks to understand this. And I have chosen 2 very popular frameworks to address this question, which are achievement goal theory by Nichols and self-determination theory by Decky and Ryan, which is probably more common to you. And shortly, the main goal of action in achievement goal frameworks is the demonstration of competence, and it outlines 2 primary goal orientation, which are task and ego orientations. And task orientation means that you define your success compared to yourself. That in athletics it would mean that if I go to the competition and I'm a sprinter, I will feel successful when I improve my result. And the ego-oriented athlete, other hand, would be more concerned about how he or she did compared to others. Again, for example, if I was a sprinter and I went to the competition, I was very ego-orientated, I would feel very successful when I have won the competition and I have outperformed my peers. So that's the rough definition of that. And self-determination theory distinguishes between 2 types of motivation, intrinsic and extrinsic. And as you may have well known, the extrinsic motivation, especially in the scientific world, it's not so hot thing because it's associated with things like dropout and other maladaptive behaviors. Intrinsic motivation is the actual love towards the thing that you are doing, and that should be the focus of athletics. And the SDT argues that there are 3 essential human needs for autonomy, competence, and social relatedness, which are thought to be required for developing internal motivation. So if these 3 prerequisites are met, then intrinsic motivation is born. And next I'm going to show a couple of studies about these motivational factors that maybe shows you what they are all about. First, I want to show the study I showed earlier, the Kallinen et al. Study, which studied Finnish junior track and field athletes. That was the exact number of the athletes, and they studied the role of goal orientations and perceived competence in predicting sustained participation. They used a longitudinal design, 3.5-year follow-up period during that time, and they found out that the things that predicted The sustained participation was task orientation and perceived competence. So that means that the athletes who pursue the mastery climate that they feel most competent when they are developing their own skills, that attitude predicted the sustained participation. And the ego orientation did not predict sustained participation in this study. And lastly, I have taken together 2 systematic reviews about these motivational factors. Balish et al. Did a systematic review actually for sports attrition that predicts dropout, but they found out that in the review that the things that predict sustained participation was the feeling of autonomy, that the children have like power, that they have the feeling that they control their sport, that they are responsible for the things they do. Other one was relatedness, that they have a lot of good friends during the sports they are doing, and they have a nice group they are training with, and also perceived competence, that they get feelings of competence during the things they do. For example, they improve their own skills. And lastly, the one correlate was task climate, again, that this mastery development climate should be emphasized. More recent review found out the reasons, most common reasons for dropout in youth experience was lack of enjoyment, low perceived competence, social pressure from parents and coaches, that this can be, for example, that many of the coaches can tell the athletes that I'm wanting you to medal at the competitions. I'm waiting for a good results from you. So that kind of pressure is the thing we are talking about here. And other common reason was other priorities, such as school, like we talked about earlier, and other sports. And then there was this maturation, or you could also call it Ray effect, like we talked about, and injuries. Lastly, I want to draw some conclusions and those practical recommendations for you. I think concerning the ESS, variety of disciplines and sports are recommended to prevent dropout. That again, you should encourage inside track and field the practices you do, especially working with the younger kids until maybe the age of 15. You should do different kinds of disciplines, and don't be jealous if they want to do other sports. And I think there was is there any Swedish coaches here? No, I can't see. Or there was an very good article about the pole vault star Duplantis, is his name, Duplantis, in our biggest newspaper, and he said that he did football until the age of 15, and he used a lot of time doing other sports also with his friends during the yard games. But he also had the early investment on pole vault. These are not contradictory with each other. You can do track and field a lot, but it's beneficial also to have other sports inside of that. And Ray should be taken into account by coaches in the daily practice, and you should monitor your athletes like biological development, for example, when planning your training programs. And the motivational studies show clearly that the mastery-oriented climate should be emphasized, even though I admit that if you want to reach high level of elite athleticism, you need to be competitive, that you have to have the need to win. But if I consider examples like Usain Bolt, who had won everything, at least at the 2012 Olympics in London, I don't think the reason for him was to continue the sports because he wanted to beat everyone all over again. I think he might have liked the running so much that he wanted to do that. And I think it was the same for Michael Phelps, who in the swimming, who did pretty good results also. So this should be especially emphasized in the childhood. And I want to point out that the dropout is not always a bad choice, that if the quality of the life gets better with the athletes and you notice that they don't want to do this, I think it's okay to say to athletes that it's okay to quit. Because I think when one door closes, another one opens in life. Thank you.